Okay. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And sorry for the slight delay. I've had a few technical glitches this morning. I hope that it's not going to impede our session today, though. So we meet again. Here we are in site planning. And well, there's still some of you who haven't joined. That's okay. I'll show the QR code again later near the end of our session. So our discussion today will revolve around the conceptual design and design development. I know last week I said I'll touch on a little bit about site inventory. I've prepared a little tip for you to a simple tool to help you in conducting a site inventory for your group task. So in conceptual, not only are we going to talk about the conceptual design, but we'll also talk about also talk a little bit about the design development. I think some of the things that I'm going to say to you today, I have already mentioned in other subjects. I'm not quite sure which ones, but I think some of the contents actually do look familiar to me. So after we've conducted a site analysis, especially grading, we move on to conceptual design and design development, which is part of the whole conceptualization of the site development vision, the vision or idea that you may have for your particular site. A couple of the things that we'll talk about during this site conceptualization thing. I do apologize for the mismatch between the language of delivery and the language on the slides. But anyways, so we will talk about project program or project programming, and then concept development. Subsequently, I'll show you a few examples of site development, namely the zoning process associated with site development, and then from zoning to circulation, and then what you might, and then some possibilities or some rules of thumbs in presenting or in modifying or in designing building forms. Not in too great a detail, because that is way out of our scope of discussion. So now the idea of conceptual development is simply to find a fit, between the site that you have and the development goals, or vice versa, the development goals and the site that you have. So fit is rather difficult to define, but like quality, quality product, a quality work, piece of art, industrial product, or a quality experience when you see it, or when you experience it, or when you feel it. In some places, or in some contexts, fit is as simple as reading zoning plans and regional development plans. So, for example, you might come across a spatial plan, a detailed spatial plan, RDTR, a detailed spatial plan, and you look at the zoning, maps, and you think, oh, this is a perfect fit because the industrial estates are situated further away from residential uses, to minimize the negative impact or the negative externalities that the industrial estate may have on the residential land uses. So sometimes fit is as simple as that, making sure that everything is in its place and there's a place for everything. At other times, it is a bit more difficult. To determine or to judge fit. In general, fit is determined by the design suitability. So, and then the project's function or the project's objective with local physical aspects, local cultural aspects, such as local laws, the environment, the local environment, and perhaps even whether the project fits with society's norms and values. So I think a few weeks back or a few days ago, I'm not sure whether it's with site planning, that I mentioned, where I mentioned something about the Native Australians the Native Australians are the original custodians of the land, and the European settlers come and develop, develop their land, so that they can conduct their activities. And what they do is they ask the elders, they ask traditional leaders of the land, what's the historical significance of the land, and so that helps them decide what they will put on the land. So for example, the university that I studied in happens to be built on a land that was traditionally used for learning and knowledge sharing. So it is only fitting that you use it as a university. That is an example of the project's goals and objectives and how it fits with societal norms, local values, local wisdom, and so on. And that sort of fit is a bit more difficult to quantify, a bit more difficult to measure precisely compared to, let's say, land use donations, because you can calculate that. You can run models, you can run computer models and computer analysis, GIS analysis on it, and everything will be nice and measured, quantified, and precise. But with societal norms and values, it's something else. It's totally different. It's a lot more difficult to quantify. It's a lot more difficult to determine the fit. So let's move on from trying to define what fits and what not, and what doesn't. When you're developing a site, ideally the development efforts, I mentioned last week about context-sensitive design. So ideally, when you develop a site, the development itself should be context-sensitive, and so it could be that you are designing with nature because you're trying to because your project, because perhaps your project is about a nature reserve. You're developing a nature reserve on your site, so you will be designing with nature, enhancing the natural values, enhancing and protecting wildlife habitats, and protecting rare specimens, rare vegetation specimens, rare animal specimens, and so on. You could also be designing with culture, coming back to the fit with local values and local traditions and local history. You could also be designing for people, or perhaps designing for a specific group of people. You could be designing, or you could be developing your site for a group of disabled people. You could be perhaps developing your site for a rehab center, a physiological rehab center, where people come to rehabilitate themselves or to recover themselves post surgery, or perhaps even developing a site to house the elderly. So a retirement home, for example. Those specific groups of people, or perhaps you're developing a site for recreation. You want to build a theme park, but the theme park is geared or is prepared in a way that is disabled friendly. So context sensitive design. What is your idea? What is your idea? What is your site? And how can you bring those two together? So your sorry. So your idea, the conceptual design, should be reflected, or should be matched against the project program, community goals, and then the site suitability itself, the physical site suitability. So the project program, your idea, for example, a theme park. So what sort of activities and what sort of land uses are you going to introduce to your site when you're developing a theme park? It can't be all recreational. You have to microzone. You have to develop a microzone for your site, microzoning for your site. This portion of the land for the older audiences, for the older audiences, containing rides that are bigger, that are scarier. Somewhere in the middle of the site would be for younger children, maybe smaller rides, a little water play area, lots of places for the children to sit and have a chance to do some sensory play, maybe. And then you have an area, or you have a network of circulation, a circulatory network that connects these two areas, and you have a reception area, and so on and so forth. So you have to do that. That's a sort of land use microzonation that you will be introducing to your site, regardless of whatever idea you have for it, whether it be a theme park, a retirement home, nature conserve, and so on. A farm, maybe. So activities, circulation, open space, etc., etc., etc. Now, again, project programming may be easy. It is easy if you consider the site as an empty lot. If you consider if there are no cultural barriers, So cultural barriers here, include regulations and standards, societal norms, societal values, historic significance, and so on and so forth. And then the conceptual design must also be matched against community goals. Perhaps you're developing a site for public housing. You want to, you're developing a site for public housing to provide affordable housing because the community needs affordable housing. Because, or perhaps if it's not housing, if it's a theme park, then at least it should ensure public health and safety. Make sure that your park is not going to endanger anyone. It's not going to kill or maim anyone, any of its visitors or staff, or worse, anyone who happens to live nearby your theme park, for example. And energy efficiency, perhaps, and other, natural and cultural resource protection, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we've been talking about this. The last couple of weeks with site suitability. So intrinsic or on-site factors, internal factors, and extrinsic or off-site factors. So you know that your site has certain physical constraints, whether it's physical constraints from the site itself, the grades, slopes, the soil type. Is it going to is the soil strong enough to support a 100 meter high roller coaster track, maybe, or will, if I put a roller coaster track there, a massive roller coaster, a gigantic, ginormous roller coaster track there, is it going to sink? So the site the site itself has constraints. If you're building an elderly home, a retirement home, will the slopes get in the way? Will they impede, or can they potentially be harmful for the residents and the staff? The staff has to push the residents around in a wheelchair. Do you think it's accessible to have a slope that is 25%? It's a 25% slope, or if you're saying that no, slope is not an issue, we can always do cut and fill. How much cut and fill are you going to do to make that 25% grade into a more acceptable and accessible grade for the elderly and for the disabled? That sort of thing. So any idea that you have, first assess the project program. What do you need on site? And then assess it according to the community goals, and then have a look at the site suitability. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. You can assess the site suitability first to see whether your idea will work there. For example, you are tasked to build a nuclear power plant, and then your client gives you a site. Build my nuclear power plant here in this site. And then you assess the intrinsic and extrinsic factors to see whether, first of all, it is safe to build a nuclear power plant in that area. Then you find out that there is an abundance of residential areas, or an abundance of human settlement near the nuclear power plant site. So, okay, that's a, sorry, that's a public health and safety hazard right there. That's a public health and safety hazard right there. No one else but the staff should be housed nearby the power plant. So when you do that, then of course you will be displacing a lot of families. So you might need to think about, okay, this is an additional side project where we have to house the displaced families. So we have to think about that, and so on and so forth. And then we come back to the intrinsic factors. Is the soil okay to build the power plant there? Would there be any? Is there going to be any potential? Sorry. Will there be any potential damage to the environment? Well, obviously, there will be some damage to the environment, but will this damage be so severe that that it will disrupt and it will endanger the environment surrounding it? Are there any exotic species that I should think about in my site and around my site? Are there any particular vegetation that I should be that I should consider? Is there a body of water or groundwater nearby that could potentially be contaminated when I build and operate this nuclear power plant? And is that groundwater or is that body of water going to be a water source or a water supply for nearby settlements, or perhaps even faraway settlements? Like, for example, Surabaya gets its water. It doesn't produce its own water. It purchases water. It sources its potable water from other sources, from cities outside Surabaya. So if, say, for example, near Umbulan, they build a nuclear power plant, then I think some Surabaya residents might have 3 or 4 eyes growing on their faces and stuff. So that sort of thing. Site suitability and community goals and project program, they go hand in hand. You do have to consider all of them, and once and the data that you collect when you consider these factors they shape the knowledge skills and your knowledge skills and values in developing and further developing the concept. It guides, it serves as guidelines to further refine your conceptual design, and then ultimately come up with several alternatives. So alternative A, alternative B, alternative C. So right now, up to this week, you should have an idea, or at least you should have determined your location, your site. See, this is one of the last week I mentioned something about mid-semester evaluations, but the mid-semester evaluations that I designed will not work if you do not have a site yet. So before I go any further, I'd like to ask you all with regards to this particular bit. I hope it's popped up on your screen already. Whether you have already determined the an area or a site for this particular task. I have confirmed with Pak Yusuf that we will not be using ITS as the project site because the master plan team because the master plan team will not let us access their data. So obviously there are some there's a degree of confidentiality there. So your task would be to source a site, to identify a potential development site. Ideally, the site would be a contoured area. It should have a fair degree of contour, and for you, so that it gives you it would give you a pretty good exercise on how to develop or how to analyze and develop a site. Where is the? That's right. You need to find a map of a location of your study area, and that particular area should we will consider it empty, as an empty area. The site should be around 5 to 10 hectares. Should cover an area of about 5 to 10 hectares for you to develop. So I'm going on a limb here, but has anyone actually sourced or considered? Has anyone considered a map or a site for this particular task? I have uploaded the site planning terms of reference in our classroom. It is right underneath the general information of the welcome welcome landing page. No? Yes.
Thank you, sir. So for my group, we're considering the empty land near Gerbang Tol Juanda, the one directed to the bandara, to the airport, but we haven't analyzed it furthermore, sir. So it's just our consideration.
That's okay. You don't need to analyze it yet. As long as you have an idea for a site, that's good. Another thing, I don't think I have a list of your groups just yet. So can I please have a list of can I please have the grouping? Can I please have a grouping by the end of the day? Any one of you can send me a list of the group names through my through WhatsApp, and then that will help me set up the submissions and the grouping and the group settings in Classroom. Okay, good that you have a site already, but well. Yeah. Let's get back to this. Let's get back to the slides now. No, I'm still showing that one. Here we go. So I don't really know the considerations that you took when you selected a site or the site for your group work, but sometimes site selection and project definition go hand in hand. So it's either it's either your client brings you a site saying that I have a site for you to help me develop. They could come to you with an empty plot of land and ask you, what should we do here? Or they may have an idea already. I have a plot of land. I want to build luxury. I want to build luxury housing there. I want to build luxury housing. I want to build and sell luxury housing. I don't have a site just yet. Can you help me find a site that is suitable? But sometimes the idea comes first, or the idea comes hand in hand with the site, or the site comes first and the idea comes a little later. But so either the idea will influence the site, or the site will influence the idea. In this particular case, or this in this slide, some project programs or project aims then are then reflected in their desired outcomes. So, for example, if your goal is to restore natural habitat, then perhaps your site would be developed as wetlands. You would provide prairies, riparian areas, and wooded forests. If your project goal is for natural resources conservation, then farmland is as far as you will go, because the farming industry does require quite a bit of groundwork. So it may look like a lush natural area that is fenced off for animals and for plantations, but a lot of the times farmlands require a lot of topsoil work. Another idea for natural resource conservation is to convert your site into public open space. There's not a lot to do. Public playground, picnic areas, benches, and perhaps a jogging track or a cycling track, and whatnot. So, if your idea is to develop a public and quasi-public facility construction, perhaps then the desired outcomes would be, or the possibilities would be, affordable housing. You develop affordable housing, public housing, vertical housing, and so on. Perhaps you're developing a school or a correctional facility, parks or waterfront promenade, and perhaps you're building a larger infrastructure, highways, airports, and long-distance bus terminals, for example. Or your goal is for business expansion, relocation, and establishment, for example, a manufacturing facility. A lot of the times when, let's say, automotive manufacturers, car manufacturers, or motorcycle manufacturers, when they're planning to introduce a new product to their product lineup, so a new SUV, for example, or a new sports motorcycle that they want to produce, a new type, a new model, a lot of the times they may need to expand their site, because the factory could be working on multiple models assembly at the same time. So in order to accommodate an extra model, then they need to expand. So that's considered as a business expansion in the form of additional manufacturing facility. Then you might need to determine the ideal location of the new facilities. So if the company is normally building small utility vehicles, small Jeeps, suddenly it decided, oh, we want to introduce a new product that is a larger SUV. So something that is totally different to the things that they're usually manufacturing, then they would most likely need a new site because a lot of the components that they manufacture for the previous models will not be compatible with the new model. So hence they need a new research and development team housed separate to the current facilities, and they also perhaps need new testing facilities, new manufacturing and assembly line, and so on and so forth. So it could be that, or you could be relocating the manufacturing facilities. A smaller scale business expansion, maybe restaurants. If a large restaurant chain, a large popular restaurant chain, think of McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Carl's, and Starbucks, Excelso. A popular restaurant chain is expanding. They want to acquire new locations. Then the knowledge and skills that you know, the knowledge and skills that you have or that you use for site planning can also become useful in determining the suitable location for the new branches to open. Same goes with banks and corporate headquarters. Real estate development is perhaps your next, is perhaps another project program or project goal that you have in mind. It could be that you're introducing new housing, single-family detached houses, condominiums, and so on, or a combination of housing and mixed-use development. And then I think for real estate development, there is a rule of thumb where for every luxury house that you build, you have to also provide 3 medium-sized houses and 5 smaller houses. So it's a 1:3:5 ratio, I think, or a 1:2:3 ratio. I'm not entirely sure of the details. So, but again, your idea in the real, this is in the class, in class, this is your idea. This is your idea, and perhaps, and you're consulting with me, perhaps, let's pretend that Yusuf and I are your clients. We own the site. We own the site that you propose. And you're trying to sell your idea to us, or perhaps let's pretend that Yusuf and I are big shot investors, and you're trying to sell, or you're trying to propose a site and a project program. To sell to us, would you like to invest in our theme park? Would you like to invest in our real estate development? Would you like to invest in our business expansion proposal or business expansion project? However, well, we'll do that just to mimic real world situations. But in reality, as I mentioned, the client normally comes with a site and an idea, and you just help develop them, or they come with a site and no idea whatsoever. Whatever it is, whatever the situation is, but if you want to become a good project programmer, then you should communicate, first and foremost, communicate all the processes that will be involved in developing this program with relevant stakeholders, including the site owners, the decision makers, local decision makers, as in local authorities, and perhaps community representatives, and other different representatives or layers of the society. So you should communicate the process. So communication is key, first and foremost. And the second criteria, or the second step, but the second thing to become a successful project programmer is that you do not lock on a particular solution. So for example, if your idea is a theme park, you have a vision of what a theme park should be, then ideally you should not fixate yourself and force your client to fixate their ideas on that particular vision. Why? Because if we come back to this slide, we have to consider site suitability, community goals, and the overall project program. And so you might have site constraints, you might have other constraints that will affect your program in such a way where you might need to adjust your program. It's good that you can adjust your program, but it could also be that the constraints are so great that you might have to change the program entirely. So goodbye theme park, hello farm, for example. And then the third thing is to reconciliate the needs of the subcomponents with the overall goal and the organizational resources that you have. So for every program, let's say when you're developing a school, schools are not just classes and administration rooms, but schools also need supporting facilities, sports hall, a gym, ideally a sports hall, a nice open green field or green pitch for potential football or hockey or other field games, and then you would also need supporting facilities such as tuck shops, canteens, cafeterias for the students and staff, parking. If you're lucky enough, you might be lucky enough to have a client that would like to develop a school with a swimming pool. So many subcomponents, a school, a correctional facility, jail, prison, also has many different subcomponents that you need to reconciliate, and you need to consider, and you need to match that up against you need to assess whether your organization, whether your team has the capabilities of actually developing this. But sir, what if, for example, I know how to build a school? I know how to build a school without a pool. I know how to build a school without, I know how to build a school, but I don't know how to build a pool. But my client wants to develop a school with a pool. I made a rhyme. So what should I do? My team has no idea how to develop a pool. Easy. You either break it to your client that I'm sorry, but I can't do pools, or we don't do pools. Or you could say to your client, that's okay. We have no idea how to develop pools. However, we know of another team that can help us with developing the pool. So you might need to outsource certain subcomponents in order for the project to come to fruition. And then another point, the last point, fourth point, is to continuously test your your design concept throughout the development stages. So does this at this stage, is it still true to the concept? At the preparation phase, is it still true to the concept of business expansion? Okay, continuing on to the organizing stage, where we gather the stakeholders. we gather the outsourced help. Will they be able to help us achieve this business expansion and this site development? And then you go to the implementation phase. When you're facing site constraints and perhaps even cultural constraints, will this business expansion effort, will this new restaurant, will this new manufacturing facility be suitable, or is it still feasible to build, and so on. So you need to continuously test and ask yourselves these throughout the stages. So, but that's a vague overall concept of project programming. But project programming has stages as well. So project programming begins with the initiation of the project, and then the development of the project's missions and objectives, and then determining the project's operational and physical requirements, and then finally the documentation and the presentation of the program to the client. So first and foremost, when you initiate a project, that's when you put your ideas, that's when you put your thoughts to paper, and you continue to develop. And then after that initial scribbling, you develop the project so that it is more mature. It has missions and objectives. You have already considered societal needs. You have already considered site constraints and so on. And then once you've determined the project's operational and physical requirements, I need to bring in 5 new teams to support me. I need to bring in new experts to help support me develop this project. And I will need so-and-so equipment. The physical requirements include, for example, several excavators, several trucks to help mobilize and to help me develop this site further. And then you document all that, make it into a nice proposal, and then you propose your program to the client, including budget, budgetary requirements and so on. So during the project initiation phase, you clarify the project objectives first. Clarify the project objectives and the project requirements. Now, the site selection process usually begins by the client. The client proposes the site. They happen to have a site. There was a time though when I proposed a site to a client. For some of you who regularly commutes between Surabaya and Sidoarjo, and you happen to fly and you happen to go past, or if you travel past the Waru train station, just a little further south from that train station, there is currently a large development. I think it's for a theme park. They have an airplane shell in there somehow. But if you travel there, that site is quite noticeable. It was formerly a soda manufacturing factory, and for some time, I think maybe 10 years ago, that site was up for sale, and I happen to know a real estate developer who wanted to expand, into other ventures, and so I gave him a call and said, "There's a site. How about we develop it?" And then he asked me to, well, I can't be He said because he's based in Jakarta, and said I can't come to Surabaya to inspect the site. So could you please just take care of everything that happens on the Surabaya site? So I contacted the landowners, secured a price offer from them, and then I pitched it to my friend. But unfortunately, I think it's because of the land title, that he wasn't interested. So that project actually had to sink. It never took off. But yeah, normally the client brings you the site. Now the project goals can vary between different clients. Your clients could be public bodies, public agencies, public authorities, or perhaps non-governmental organizations. Your clients could be private business people, businessmen, businesswomen. Usually, public sector projects. Or projects that are let's just say government projects. Usually government projects come with a site, because it is of course obviously it's their land. It is obviously their land. It has been cleared, so that you don't have to worry about titling and other administrative or legal constraints. However, sometimes you might need to adjust the land uses a bit. Although most of the times, government projects are quite they stay true to the current land use that has been designated. So yeah, good. But other times you might need to adjust a little bit. So for example, one project that I almost did was for I think it was for Angkasa Pura. They owned the land. And they wanted to build a hospital. This was in Jakarta, again some years ago. When I came to visit the location, took pictures, documented the location, and I secured the legal documents, land use documents, to tell me what the status and what the city's plans for the development was. Unfortunately, it wasn't for public service facilities. It wasn't for healthcare facilities. It was for something else. The city plans it for green open areas. One of the reasons why they wanted to keep it a green open space area is because of the high voltage or the high voltage power lines that go through the site, and so that was a double whammy. It was a combination of no and no. I took that up with the client, and they said, "Well, we can propose land use change." However, I wasn't so comfortable about situating a hospital near high voltage power lines, so I decided to leave. That project. I said, "No, thank you, but here's my resignation from this project." Where was I? Right, great. So, project initiation. Once the objectives has been clarified, you determine the land uses or activities that are that will take place on the site, and then you can determine a site selection criteria based on the land use or based on the land uses or the activities that you will introduce or that you will accommodate in that project. Some of the site selection criteria could be size, cost, access and utilities, some physical constraints, and land use regulations, as I mentioned, and then of course other contextual factors that influence the site selection process would be the transportation, market area, and perhaps other hazards. So yeah. Again, I don't know the I don't know what the thought process in for you when you selected a site for your assignment. But normally, if you don't have if you only have a project idea but you don't have a site, then the site selection process goes more or less like this. So once you determine the criteria, or I need a site that is about so and so large, but it should be 50 hectares, but it shouldn't cost me too much to acquire that land and to develop the land. And then after you have determined the site selection criteria, you gather site data and collect potential sites. So based on these criteria, I have options A, B, C, or D. And then once you have the options, you evaluate each site's suitability. What's the capacity? What's the compatibility? How is the affordability? Which one is cheaper than the other? Sometimes if you set a budget, a certain budget, for example, 10 million euros, and then you have a site that costs 10.5 or 12 million euros, you might think, well, the price is way up, way above my budget. However, considering the site capacity, site compatibility, considering all other factors, then perhaps you would be willing to spend a little more to secure the site. So once you have evaluated each site suitability, then you rank the evaluated sites, and then you select the best site. Once you come up with the best site, best according to affordability, compatibility, and capacity, you then conduct a feasibility study. Does it make sense to build whatever it is that you want to build on that site that you chose? So it seems like a lot of problems and problem solving involved in the site selection alone. Well, yes, it is. However, problem solving is an integral part of the site planning and the design process. So the site selection, for example, is mostly a matter of optimizing the goals and finding a site that ticks all, if not all, then ticks most of the boxes in the criteria list. After you've chosen a site, you identify the constraints and the opportunities to understand the puzzle that the site presents to you. And perhaps challenges the program that you're considering. Now, the solution to this puzzle, the solution to this, to the constraints and opportunities of the site, is discovered or is revealed throughout the design, the conceptual design phase, and subsequently the entire site development or site design phases. A little quote from Schoen right here: designers juggle variables reconcile conflicting values, and maneuver around constraints. A process which, although some design products may be superior to others, there are no unique right answers. So there is no clear cut on what is the correct design or a wrong design. There are only unique designs because at the end of the day, perhaps different designers, depending on their educational background, depending on their personal experiences, they may approach a problem differently. There are 14 of us in this class, and so I'm sure there are 14 different ideas to removing a tree, for example, from a site. You need to remove that tree from the site. My idea would probably be around, well, let's dig it up and move it somewhere where we can replant it. Your idea, one of you might think, I'll just cut it down. We can use the wood for firewood, for example, or we can use the wood for construction. One of you might think, let's just leave it there. Let's not move it, and let's design and build around it instead. So again, 14 heads should be at least, should also have 14, well, ideally should have 14 different approaches or 14 different ideas. Now, creative problem solving involves the pursuit of 5 things: facts, problems, ideas, solutions, and acceptance, or the acceptance of a solution. Facts. You gather facts by conducting a site inventory. And from these facts, you can identify problems, constraints. And from these constraints, you develop your ideas for a solution. And once that solution is communicated to your client, then comes acceptance, whether they accept or reject the solution that you propose. So an acceptable site or an acceptable project location is a location that ticks off a lot of the boxes, that fulfills the project program, that fulfills community goals, and of course, I think I forgot to resize this. And of course, that ticks off the site suitability checklist. So a site is not just a given. It's not something that is given exclusively by a client, but it should also be acceptable. It should be also acceptable by the community, and of course, suitable with intrinsic and extrinsic factors. So moving on to the conceptual design process itself, there are 4 steps involved in the conceptual design process. First and foremost is to delineate primary and secondary conservation areas. If there are protected areas, focus on that first. Isolate them. Isolate them. I don't mean remove them, but isolate them, highlight them, prioritize them, build around them, not build through them. Don't get rid of them. So delineate primary, secondary conservation areas, because those areas are valuable not only for environmental sustainability, but conservation areas can also potentially enhance your can potentially enhance your development idea. It could add market value to the product that you're selling, and so on. Step 2, delineate areas that are most suitable for development. Of course, this step involves the site inventory and analysis, where you determine which of these sites are more suitable for development. For example, they are less prone to landslides. They are not on an extreme slope or an extreme ridge or wall. They are of that the areas that you want to use for development can or don't have loose soil on top, and so on. Once you've delineated the areas, locate primary and secondary circulation networks, including primary and secondary access points. Where are the service access points? Where's the loading? Where should the loading area be? Where should the primary access be for visitors? Where should the staff entrance be? Sorry. And then once you've done that, you supplement the diagrammatic concept plan with more information. You then populate your plan with the activities or land uses that you want to introduce to your site. So it's not the land users first, but you should identify, but it's the access points and the primary circulatory networks that should be identified first. How you move around the site, and then the functions will follow. So you can use a diagram as simple as this for developing your site. Now, a functional diagram such as this illustrates the relationships between program components and activities. At this stage, the activities that are public, semi-public, or semi-private are already differentiated. So designate where the public areas are, where the semi-public areas are, where the private areas are, and where the service areas are. And service areas should be accessible to the semi and the private areas because they support because the service area supports all the functions and activities in these two areas, but there should be no direct public access to the service area, because who wants to see your restaurant's kitchen? To be honest, nobody, because a lot of the times the kitchens are atrocious. Yeah, I remember seeing several fast food chain kitchens, and that made me regret my visit to that particular place. So service areas should be hidden, not or perhaps not entirely seen by the public eye. And this simple functional diagram also indicate the flow of traffic or the flow of visitors or flow of activities between one area and another, and so it illustrates how the flow of activities would be in the entire site. People access through the public area, entering through the semi-public area, and perhaps for some visitors, they might want to go into a more private area. So, in a museum, for example, this would be the foyer. The semi-public area is where they have general displays. And the private area would be the more specific exhibition sections. So you might have a prehistoric section, you might have a medieval section, you might have a modern day marvels section, and so on and so forth in a museum. And the service areas, as the arrows indicate, visitors cannot access the service area, but people in the service area, the staff, they can access semi-public and private areas, because again, this area supports all the other activities within the site. Now, when you're designing a site, you're essentially juggling three components: open spaces, circulation networks, and buildings. Buildings can be great, or they can be small as simple as a bench, a park bench, and a trash can. Those are considered as buildings as well, or built components. Let's call them built components. Now, open space systems may consist of softscapes and hardscapes, of different rooms, or different rooms or corridors. For example, in this particular area here, this is the corridor area, whereas the other two, or the difference between the hardscape and the softscape sort of defines the different functions of these two areas. Where the hardscape functions more as a circulation or a circulatory means, the softscape is not so much circulatory, but people usually stand still and they conduct their activities there, whether they're playing ball, playing a kite, or having a nice picnic. Having a nice picnic out. So softscape. So the difference. Sorry, my point is the difference in texture, soft and hard, smooth and rough, can be used to delineate and to define different functions. So when you're dividing up a site, you don't have to build a wall or erect a massive fence to differentiate between one space and another. You can use different textures instead, and that gives you nice clean sight lines, a continuous view between the two different functions and the two different spaces, but at the same time maintaining a certain hierarchy of functions. Circulation, play area. Again, here, not entirely that clear, but circulation and well, not play or not activity areas, but circulation, and these are more let's say information or informative areas. This one is a little less obvious. The steps may look like they are for circulatory purposes, but this is actually a stylized waterfall. So definitely no go there. You don't use the stairs. The stairs are not being used as a circulatory means. But the circulation actually, takes place in the form of these floating concrete blocks. It's like playing a video game when you float when you step on these floating concrete blocks. I don't know, like Super Mario Brothers or other similar video games. But again, different textures, different functions, and a very and of course different shapes, different materials, different forms can also signify or indicate different functions as well. Even though this is a very familiar circulatory shape for us, stairs, we can go up the stairs, yes, but when you introduce other elements to that particular facility, then it takes on an entirely different meaning. Circulatory networks, obvious, but a circulation network should not only cater for a particular mode of transport, should not only cater for a particular need, but it should be accommodating. It should be accommodating to people of many different needs. So you can have a circulation network for, you can have a separate circulation network such as this, where non-vehicular transport and vehicular transports are separated. You could also introduce components or elements such as this, such as bollards or street. Oh, this is not firm enough. Such as bollards or street barriers to delineate and to separate between different modes of transport. But notice that this particular street here does not cater to a single form of transport only. It's not exclusively for cars, but you can also see non-motorized transport modes being used here, and you could still see pedestrians here and there. Although perhaps this is not exactly the ideal pedestrian street, but options and mixed modes of transport is the way to go. That you get the idea. And then the composition of all of those things. The composition of circulatory systems and buildings and other components, such as aesthetic components, perhaps. But sometimes even aesthetic components can also serve, can also be multi-purpose things. Vegetation, for example, if you take vegetation, I love using vegetation as an example, but when you take vegetation as an example, yes, they do serve an aesthetic value. They provide a different play of colors and textures. So you see a bit of purple here, a little bit of red on these hedges, some light green here, darker shades of green there. It's a wonderful composition of colors, but vegetation also help reduce surface temperature, air temperature. So by X amount of degrees, not too significant, but vegetations help make the temperature a bit more tolerable. At least if they don't cool things down very much, they can still provide shade to anyone who's willing to sit underneath the trees. Of course, you can also introduce artificial forms of shade, built forms of shade, such as this right here. and this doubles as a security function as well, because it has a CCTV installed in it to help the service people maintain and monitor the security. This is an excellent example. This right here is an excellent example of vegetative shading. Although, of course, the overgrowth and the shading from this side or from along this area, from this plane right here, is supported by man-made structures. But nevertheless, I think the predominant element in this particular view or in this particular picture are the vegetations themselves. So not merely the built or the man-made structures, but I think the vegetation, the trees and the shrubs, they're very dominant there. And here is a stark contrast. I think these two pictures are a very stark contrast of vegetation use or lack thereof. This is the Wheel of Brisbane, and in summer days, open streets like this, they get very, very hot, and with some. Queensland actually has a very severe ultraviolet or UV, have very severe UV levels, borderline dangerous. So we don't use SPF 35 there, we use SPF 50 and above. And the sun's glare is actually quite intense. That yeah, everybody wears shades everywhere they go. A friend of mine actually refused to wear sunglasses. He refused to wear shades because he thought they were silly. So everywhere he went, he just squinted to adjust his light, his eyes. He wore a cap and he squinted everywhere he went. And after 2 or 3 years in Queensland, he developed mild symptoms of cataract because of the UV sorry, because of UV radiation and sunlight intensity. So I think I can safely guess that most of you will choose to walk on this path rather than this open sunny path. Although open sunny paths like this are very crowded during winter because the temperatures are more mild, but you still get enough sunlight so that it's actually a lot more comfortable. So that is why the vegetation arrangements are made in such a way so that people have the option to walk under the shade during summer and walk under the sun during colder times of the year. And another reason why the vegetations have been arranged in such a way, in such distance, is of course to direct your eyes to the main spectacle or the main focal point, which is the large Riesenrad. No, that's a German term for it. The large Ferris wheel. Is Ferris wheel? No, well, the large thing, the large wheel, which is the highlight of the city. Next, buildings. Of course, you have to, if your site has buildings, especially if they're historical buildings, then there are certain elements that you need to maintain, or there are certain elements that you need to replicate to make sure that the new buildings that you introduce to the site are coherent and they stay and they stay true to the theme. For example, if you're building in an historic area in your city, be it old part of Jakarta or an old part of Surabaya, then you wouldn't want ideally you wouldn't want to introduce big glass tower blocks, although that has happened, but you would borrow elements from existing buildings along the corridor, and then you incorporate that to your design so that you present something that is modern, but still keeping up with something modern, but still trying to harmonize with the current or with the existing structures there. So here's over the next few slides, I'm going to present to you an example of a site planning, the site planning process or a site planning project. Here, in this particular example, the task is to build something on a plot of land that is 76 hectares. That covers an area of 76 hectares. And from the map here, you can see that there's quite a lot of contouring going on the site. Other additional features that you may have noticed would be the circulation networks that divide the site almost in half, and then there's also another circulation network that runs alongside or serves as a site's border. And then here there is I would say a main circulation network or a highway. So the spatial program for this particular site includes several different zones. So it includes housing, it includes a sports arena or a stadium, wastewater facilities, and then an area for public facilities. So there are four different primary zones there. So for the first of all, let's kick it off with the stadium or the sports arena first. When you are asked to develop a site or to develop an idea, say a stadium, for example, there are many ways for you to go about in searching for relevant information about the stadium. You can find out the design standards, for a sports stadium of so and so size, what facilities they have, and the dimensions of each room, or you can learn from similar facilities. So, for example, in this particular case, the stadium area, is a synthesis of many different case studies, and then the stadium area itself, or the sports arena area itself, is then subdivided into different sub zones, into different other functions. First is the main stadium. Oh, sorry. This is actually showing the different case studies that the designer considered when they're developing the stadium. So first, They studied a stadium in Bandung, and then another sports arena in Bekasi, another one from Bogor, and from ITS itself. And from there, each sports facilities have different areas. They have different facilities, and this is why case studies are very effective in identifying or in helping you identify the potentials for your site, because again, yeah, this gives you an idea. This gives you an idea of what you can do within a limited amount of land. So some sports facilities sit on larger plots of land than others. One in Bekasi, for example, is 18 hectares, whereas the one in Bogor is only 1.5 hectares. But 1.5 hectares can already accommodate several different events. So you can imagine what a much larger site would be able to accommodate. What options can you produce there? So coming back to the project brief for that 76 hectare site. So the stadium the planned stadium, the plan is to build a stadium that will serve a regional level, so tingkat kabupaten, or up to a regency level for a citywide or regency-wide stadium with the complete or with enough facilities and amenities. So they decided that they would look up to the Bekasi case study instead, because the Bekasi case study is actually of the same level as the project brief. Therefore the stadium's area should at least be 18 hectares, but that is not included. That doesn't account for parking. That could be up to 30% of the entire land requirements. So for the stadium area, therefore it is concluded that it should at least be 23.4 hectares, so a bit bigger than the one in Bekasi. Again, for the water treatment and waste facilities, the designer decided to reflect on similar case studies. Here, they took a case of they studied ones from the housing development in West Surabaya, and another development in Eastern Surabaya. And likewise for the other facilities, for the housing, public facilities, and trade, they might already determine, or they actually subtracted from the original size. They took 23.4 hectares away from the stadium, and they worked out 2 hectares for the sanitation, wastewater treatment from similar case studies. And so the total amount needed for these two are 25.4. Therefore, the amount of land that is available for housing and public facilities and trade or commercial activities are about 50.6 hectares. Still, the designer broke it down even further. The proportions for the proportions used in this in the housing zone uses the following ratio. So the ratio between housing and non-housing. I think they took it up. I think they took it from local standards, where housing and housing and non-housing facilities should be about 55 to 45 ratio. Normally, it would be 60 to 40. And then there's additional details, and then here is under here they have presented other different ratios for housing, public greenery, public facilities, and commercial activities, and roads or circulation. So roads and circulations 25. And finally, from these different ratios, the designers work out how much is needed for housing, how much is needed for public for green areas, and how much is needed for the other functions. And when you translate those proportions into the site, then you will get something like this. Here's a stadium zone. Here's a stadium area that is. That is 23 hectares. Service facilities or wastewater treatment facilities, 2 hectares. The public facilities and trade and commercial, 5.6, and the predominant housing area or housing zone, almost 28 hectares. And then to determine the main entrance and access points, you might want to draw up a criteria that takes into consideration the distance between the access point and the main road, and how easy it is to recognize from the main road the distance to the distance or the centrality where the approach is positioned, and access to service centers and such. And from that matrix, you can come up with something similar to this. The blue lines represent the primary access or the primary circulation, the primary circulatory networks, whereas the red lines represent alternative routes. Alternative routes to other functions around the site, because the site is actually in front or adjacent to several villages, actually several other settlements. Therefore, the development needs to consider how people can still access these two villages without having to use the main entrances here and there. So they provided additional access roads that goes around the site to ensure public access to other functions. Again, you may have different alternatives, and you may need to assess different alternatives for the road network analysis. And this is the result of that analysis. And then you further develop the circulatory networks to express the different types of circulation within the site, in and around the site. You predict vehicular movement and where you might, and the different locations where you might provide sidewalks and answer. And this is just a certain. This is just a key plan that that signifies where significant or significant road details may be seen. So this is section C and C. This is section D and D. Section B, B, and section A, and so on. And so, what do these sections mean? Well, they then are expressed to show the different atmospheres that each road or each street should convey. So the AA section, the AA section is at so and so nodes. They should consist of such a boulevard with vegetation alongside, whereas B would have would be perhaps a single or a two lane road, not a boulevard. DD should be a boulevard with different features, of course. There is a berm right here and there, or a shoulder, whereas in AA, in these nodes, they don't exactly have a road shoulder, but they still do have water drainage systems. In DD, it's similar to AA, but with potential for walking activities or walking purposes. And here are just the other different samples of road of street sections. And so from a macro zoning analysis, this is for a different project. This is perhaps for a master plan for a greater area. Just last year, I was involved in, Pak Yusuf and I were involved in compiling and formulating a master plan for the new city center in Jember, for the government center in Jember. And so we did something similar to this, where we situated the regional government offices and other supporting agencies or supporting functions. Just different alternatives to that. But this is a spatial relationships, a spatial relations matrix that you can use to help you in designing and developing the circulatory networks in your on your site. So I think the diagram speaks for itself, where the larger red dots indicate that they have high or they have direct connection, they have direct relationship between one function and another. Whereas the smaller the circle, then the less of a stronger, the lesser the relationships or the activities that these functions or that these activities have are becoming, so they have a weaker sort of relationship spatially, and then they have here the yellow circles indicate similar functions or similar characters between one function and another. So service area, of course, is similar to warehouse and storage and garage as well. And perhaps the radio operator area, the radio operator room, also has a similarity with the health function. Again, this is just more of a subdivision of the housing and the subdivision of the stadium area. I think I'll put these slides up. In classroom, share it with you so that you can read through it. The alternatives of the zones, and then the implementation on the site. And then further development and the microzonation microzonation concept. And this is similarly done with the housing. I think the slides are a bit of a jumble. That's why I'm kind of confused here. But anyways, this is coming back to the housing and the stadium. And once you conduct further microzonation, then you can see how the site or the concept then continues to mature, and then finally it manifests itself into a much more communicable and a much more developable developable stage. Now, a little bit on building form. As I said, building form can be something that is very, very contextual due to historical significance of an area, or it could also be that it's all modern and it's all commercial and modern, so you have a bit more wiggle room in there. But you do have to consider the building mass composition, and whether there are any variations in the building sequence, or are they all taking on the same shapes? Other similarities in shape or scale. So some of the things that you need to look out for are elevation, the levels, how many levels there are, and the shape of the roof, where the buildings are orientated, the mass form of the building, and perhaps even some architectural styles as well. For example, if you have a building or a complex of buildings, and you need to enhance the buildings because of its historical significance, perhaps your clients are asking you to build or to make the buildings have a more traditional look. This is an example of a Majapahit concept. Of course, the concept is not implemented entirely. It's more ornamental, as you can see here. There are some more traditional decorations and elements that are introduced to the original building. Perhaps even a removal of some elements, as you can see on the fences or on the walls that surround the building. Different coloration, a repetition of certain elements, or an enhancement of certain elements, and so on and such. Or you can probably perhaps even come across a site that needs a bit of harmonization. The buildings on top have different heights, and different heights and shape, different height, different orientation as well. One is facing that way, and the other ones are facing this way. And so you might need to redesign that particular strip or corridor by reorienting the buildings. None of them are facing that way anymore, and they all have a relatively similar height. So it's more level, and of course not just the roof and the building's orientation, but also the building's proportions. The proportions between the roof and the body and other elements are also here included. Right. I think that's all. That's all I have for you now. Actually, there is something else. I did remember that I promised that I would share with you a little site inventory tool that can help you with gathering data for your task. Now, you can use a simple site inventory matrix such as this, where you have different categories for different physical attributes, biological attributes, and perhaps cultural attributes. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that same order. You can add other attributes to the matrix as needed, and then you subdivide the categories into different subcategories: soil, topography, maybe other things. And then here, where you note down the attributes, the bearing capacity, porosity, stability, elevation, slope, and aspect for the topography, and you can also add notes to it. It has poor bearing capacity, for example. It has high porosity, it's not very stable, and so on and such. So when you're conducting a site inventory, when you're data collecting, it is good to have everything organized like this, rather than. But you can also draw directly on your maps to indicate where the soil bearing capacity is best, where the soil is better stable, where more stable. Sorry. Whether there are any extreme slopes or extreme gradients, perhaps even map out a distribution of local vegetation, and you can identify, of course, invasive species that exist on your site, and so on and such. So one of the exercises, or one of the tasks for your evaluation, or for the examination, is actually for you to carry out a site inventory of your surroundings, of the street or the corridor of the street that you live on. But I don't know if I'm going to incorporate this to the exam at the moment. But I might just have to confirm with Pak Yusuf. But we did this last year, or was it the year before? I think we did this last year, and the results were quite convincing, and it was quite fun, actually. I think I think you guys did a similar activity when you took the introduction to the built environment the subject with me last time as well. Similar to that, where you as I promised, I would need to for some of you who have just joined in, here is the QR code. And while we wait for those who need to mark their attendance, I need to remind you once again, can I have the group list today, at least by the end of the day, so that I can set it up in Classroom. Right, I hope I've made myself clear, but if you do have any questions, you may do so. You may ask your questions now. Otherwise, I look forward to consulting with you, to consulting your site with you, and we can perhaps explore the possibilities for what you can do with your site, or if you already have an idea. So would it be possible? Here's the thing: you might already have an idea, and you might come up to me and ask me, is it possible for me to do this? Well, I don't want you to ask me whether it's possible for you to do so, whether it's allowed for you to do so, but I need you to convince me and Pak Yusuf that we should be developing so-and-so activities on our site. So yeah, looking forward to that consultation. Other than that, I wish you all a lovely day. It's very nice and sunny out here today. And take good care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Have a great day. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.